If you are a founder using AI to build your app, there is one thing the model will never tell you, and it almost broke my authentication logic. So recently I decided to run a simple experiment. I built a small IoT app using Cursor with the latest Opus model. Nothing huge, just a focus app that needs to connect with the external device. I wanted to see how far vibe coding can really go. And to be fair, some parts were honestly impressive. The UI, done fast. Basic screens, clean. Simple logic, surprisingly solid. In certain parts, it genuinely felt like I was working 5 to 10 times faster. And that's exactly why this is worth talking about. Because the more powerful this feels, the easier it is to trust it a little too much. And that's where things started to get interesting. The app had to connect with a physical device. Now, from a founder's perspective, that sounds simple, just connect and send data. But in reality, the device required a very specific sequence of steps. You had to establish the connection, then send commands in the right order, wait for a correct response, and only then move to the next step. Miss the order and it doesn't work. The model kept mixing things up. The code looked fine, it compiled, it even explained why it should work. But the sequence was wrong. So I tried guiding it, explaining the documentation, rephrasing prompts, breaking it down step by step. 4 hours later, it still didn't really understand what was happening. It wasn't dumb, it was just producing something that looked correct. And if you are a founder looking at the output, it absolutely feels trustworthy. That's a dangerous part. And if that was just about a device connection, it would be annoying, but manageable. The more serious moment came later. The app was caching 3 sensitive values. All of them were part of authentication process. One of them was literally called password. That one was encrypted. The other 2 were also part of the credentials. They were required to authorize the user, but their names didn't clearly suggest they were sensitive. So they were stored without encryption. From the outside, everything worked. Login worked, connection worked, no errors, but under the surface, 2 critical pieces of authentication data were exposed. Not because the model was reckless, but because it follows patterns. When something clearly looks like a password, it protects it. When it doesn't, it assumes it's safe. And that's the moment where vibe coding stops being fun. Because AI can recognize patterns, but it doesn't truly understand your system. And it definitely doesn't know when it's wrong. And this is exactly where this stops being a technical story and it becomes a founder story. Because if you are building with AI, you are still the one responsible for the product. The model can generate code, it can explain the code, it can sound extremely confident about the code, but it doesn't carry the business risk. You do. If something breaks in production, that's on your company. If user data is exposed, that's on your reputation. If the investor asks, how is this secured? You can't answer, well, this is AI. And this is the illusion vibe coding creates. When everything compiles, when the app runs, when the login works, it feels finished. It feels production ready, but it works is not the same as it's safe. And it's definitely not the same as it's scalable. AI doesn't understand your architecture, it doesn't understand your long-term roadmap, it generates output. And it works best when someone technical is still reviewing the output. Not to slow down things, but to protect the business you are building. Now, none of those means you shouldn't use vibe coding. In fact, I think you absolutely should, because in the right context, it's incredibly powerful. If you are building a prototype, if you are testing an idea, if you need a quick demo for investors, or if you are validating user flow, it's amazing. You move fast, you see things on the screen, you iterate in minutes instead of days. That's a huge advantage. But the moment your product touches real-world complexity, that's where you need to slow down. Hardware integrations, custom authentication flow, some financial data, health data, anything that becomes the core of your business logic. In those areas, speed alone is not enough. Vibe coding is not a replacement for a technical thinking, it's an accelerator. And like any accelerator, if no one is steering careful, you just crash faster. So especially in these high-risk areas, someone technical should review the output. Not to block you, not to rewrite everything, but to check for holes, to check for assumptions, to make sure the system actually makes sense. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what if I don't have a technical co-founder and I still want to build this myself? That's fair. So if you really want to vibe code without someone technical, at least think in terms of reducing risk. One simple approach is this. Put your entire codebase in GitHub, use proper version control, and connect a second AI model as a reviewer. But here's the important part. Don't ask it to check everything. That's where founders make a big mistake. When you tell an AI to review the whole codebase for all possible issues, it becomes noisy, it starts flagging random things. It misses important ones. Instead, give it one very specific job. For example, review this code only for security issues, or check whether any sensitive data is stored without encryption. One model generating, another model reviewing for one narrow concern. Does this eliminate risk? No, but it lowers it. You are not removing uncertainty, you are managing it. And even then, to truly judge whether the feedback makes sense, you still need at least a little basic technical understanding. It's not a perfect solution, but today it's a reasonable workaround. So when you look at all of this together, the conclusion is actually very simple. Vibe coding is not a problem. Blind trust, in many cases, it really can make you dramatically faster. But speed doesn't remove responsibility. As a founder, you are still accountable for what goes into production, for how user data is handled, for how authentication works, for what happens when something breaks. AI doesn't understand your business, it doesn't understand long-term consequences, and it doesn't know when it's wrong. It generates output. That output can be brilliant or slightly wrong, and sometimes slightly wrong is all it takes to create a serious issue. So use it, move fast, prototype, validate, but when things become critical, when your product touches money, data, hardware or real users, slow down just enough to make sure it actually makes sense. And if you have building with AI and at some point thought, I'm not sure if that's solid, that's normal. Sometimes you don't need to rebuild everything. You just need someone technical to look at it and tell you, this is fine, this needs fixing, this could become a problem later. So thanks for watching and I will see you in the next one.